you're like this piano and you sing slightly out of tune, you can still make beautiful music. So feel free to sing along if you know this song. I stand amazed in the presence of Jesus the Nazarene, and wonder how he could love me, a sinner condemned unclean. How marvelous, how wonderful, and my song shall ever be. How marvelous, how wonderful is my Savior's love for me. He took my sins and my sorrows, and he made them his very own. He bore my burden to Calvary, where he suffered and died alone. How marvelous, how wonderful, and my song shall ever be. How marvelous, how wonderful is my Savior's love for me. When with the ransom in glory, his face I at last shall see. 'Twill be my joy through the ages to sing of his love for me. Sing that again. 'Twill be my joy through the ages, Lord, to sing of your love for me. Oh Lord, I'm just singing how marvelous, how wonderful, and my song shall ever be. How marvelous, how wonderful is my Savior's love for me. How marvelous, how wonderful, and my song shall ever be. How marvelous, how wonderful is my Savior's love for me.
There are 3 ways to give here at the Village if you are able and willing. The first way is through our website at www.thevillageratlanta.com/give, and that will prompt you through. The other way is to text GIVE plus the dollar amount to 404-998-8979, and you'll get a text message prompting you through there. And if you want to do it the old-fashioned way, you can send a check to our physical location at 3418 Dogwood Drive, Hapeville, Georgia, 30354. We do have one announcement this week, and that is that we will be doing a socially distant gathering at Jess Lucas Park, just across the railroad tracks from the Village, for Easter, so that we can socially distantly gather together and celebrate in Lord's resurrection. On that note, I would just like to say a brief prayer before we go back to more great music. Dear Lord, thank you for this time together. Thank you for our ability to socially distant gather and gather through the internet so that we can still form community in these difficult times. And thank you for always walking alongside us. In your name we pray. Amen.
Your eye is on the sparrow, and your hand, it comforts me. From the ends of the earth to the depths of my heart, let your mercy and strength be seen. You call me to your purpose as angels understand. For your glory, may you draw all men as your love and grace demands. And I will run to you, to your words of truth, not by might, not by power, but by the Spirit of God. Yes, I will run the race till I see your face. Oh, let me live in the glory of your grace. You call me to your purpose as angels understand. For your glory, may you draw all men as your love and grace demands. And I will run to you, to your words of truth, not by might, not by power, but by the Spirit of God. Yes, I will run the race till I see your face. Oh, let me live in the glory of your grace. Yes, I will run to your words of truth, not by might, not by power, but by the Spirit of God. Yes, I will run the race till I see your face. Oh, let me live in the glory. Oh, let me live in the glory. Oh, let me live in the glory of your grace.
Thank you, Ethan and Rachel. We love y'all very, very much. Hey guys, if you live in the metro Atlanta area, try to be a part of our service next Sunday, which is Easter. It's the high holy day of the Christian year, right? We celebrate the resurrection of Jesus, and we're going to have that celebration, barring a hurricane, we're going to have that celebration in the park in Hapeville. It's the Jess Lucas Park. If you're looking at our mural at the church, you know where the mural is? Stick your arm out to the right. Just go on that road straight over the railroad tracks and you'll see the park. There's a beautiful, over 100-year-old chapel that's there, but we're going to be in a beautiful place set up. You'll see us, and we want you to be a part of it. Bring lounge chairs. Don't worry about bringing lunch. I think the lunch thing was overcomplicating it. If people want to eat there, then bring lunch, but it's going to be whatever you want to do, just do it. And we're not going to have an egg hunt. I've talked to some of the moms and they say, yeah, let's just not worry about that this year. So no egg hunt after the service, but come, bring your lounge chairs and plan to be with us. It's going to be wonderful. And I can't wait. I really hope that you'll be a part of our service. So there's that. I'm excited about the talk today. Jane and I, over the last couple of weeks, have spent a lot of time talking about what we have missed most through the pandemic. And quite frankly, it is people sitting around our table and us just having great family conversations with family and friends, village folks and non-village folks, people we've known a long time, people that we've just met. We have missed the table time. And now as things are beginning to pick up a little bit, we're not out of the woods yet, but it's beginning to pick up. I thought it might be good just to talk to you about the table. It's one of my favorite talks, actually, to talk about the table. And then to challenge you to begin thinking about it and beginning to put yourself in places where, even if it's just online, you can experience some of what I'm going to talk about today. So I hope you like this. This is one of the talks that I love the most. I think it's going to be very helpful. When I think about love, I always think about a table. I grew up on Roy Huey Road in Riverdale, Georgia, and the happiest times of my childhood were spent seated at the table in the evening with my mom and my dad and my sister, and we talked about everything. We talked about my mom, what was going on at work, where my dad was having to travel for business, what my sister was doing in her classroom or on sports, what was going on in my life. It was just beautiful. Of course, we put all the food on the table, and my dad and I would stay at the table until every morsel of food was gone. Probably not the best thing to do at the table as much as we did it, but that's what we did. Then when I was 11, we moved to South Africa, and we lived there for 6 months. And in South Africa, they didn't have television. And so we literally would have dinner around the table, my family, and then we would play cards. Or if we didn't play cards, we would turn the radio on and we would listen to serials, pretty much like people listened to in the United States back in the 30s. The Shadow Knows and The Lone Ranger and those kind of things. We would sit around the table, we'd listen. It was wonderful. Or again, I loved when I'd go to my granny's house. She would always cook a big Sunday lunch, roast beef and mashed potatoes. You know the deal, Southern wonderful food. And my aunts and uncles would be there, and it would be so wonderful. And then once every quarter or so, we would have just sandwiches, but my dad would go to this great Jewish deli and he would buy all these cool, wonderful meats, pastrami and all the rest and all this great bread. And we would have a lovely Sunday afternoon around a table. And as I got older, I began to realize if there was ever a big event, it seemed like we found out about it around a table. You know what I'm talking about? If someone, friends of my mom and dad, if they found out they were pregnant, it seemed like they would come to the house and the coffee pot would be put on and coffee would be served and they would sit around the table and they would share that good news. Or sometimes it maybe wasn't good news. Someone's getting a divorce, or maybe someone had gotten a bad diagnosis from the doctor, but they would be sitting around the table. And as a kid, I observed and realized, man, it's important what happens around the table. When I think about love, I just can't get it out of my mind. I always think about a table. As I grew older, there were other tables. When I started my own family, there was our little table. A part of, I think, becoming that family, there's, of course, that first little table when it's just partners. That's beautiful and lovely. But then if children are brought into the scenario, then of course the table, the day of the beautiful, decorated, perfect table, that goes away, doesn't it? It becomes a little messy. And it's messy for a while you have kids. I can still remember after my sons were born, what a triumph it was when we had the first meal where nobody spilled anything and nobody cried. I think Ethan, my youngest son, he was about 16, and not really, Ethan, it's just a joke. But it does take a long time. You know what I'm talking about. But pretty significant moments happened around the table as my boys were growing up. And I remember them coming home from school and talking, or them talking about their sports, and they were just so excited, and just to sit around the table and share with them was beautiful. I remember a pretty significant event that happened around the table. I guess my older son, Ray, was about 9. Ethan would have been about 6. Ethan was spending the night with a friend, and it was just Ray and me, and I thought maybe this is the time I should give him the birds and the bees talk. And so I had been nervous as can be. He's my oldest son, my oldest child, and I had been studying and wanted to say it just right. And I carefully and accurately conveyed everything that I knew to my 9-year-old son. And I remember that his eyes were as big as saucers. And when I finished, I asked him if there was anything that he wanted to say or ask. And I never will forget, he said, "Dad, that is the grossest thing I have ever heard." And he excused himself from the table and he left. And I thought, I have certainly failed there. He now lives in Southern California and he has 4 children. So I'm thinking he got past the gross thing that he was thinking at 9, and he's doing okay. So then fast forward 3 years, now Ethan is 9. And I remember him at the table, just Ethan and I, and me saying to him, "Ethan, tonight's the night that I want to talk with you about sex." And that little boy with a big smile says, "Okay, Dad, what do you want to know?" And I said, "Okay, this will be an entirely different conversation." And it was. Seriously, it was always the highlight of the day for me when I would sit with my family around the table. It's a funny thing about tables, at least in my family, we always had kind of our seats. I don't know if y'all do that. We had our seats. I'm just now beginning to give up my seat. I've always had the seat at the head of the table at my house, and I love my seat. And I'm not wasn't big on sharing my seat at the head of the table. But now with all the patriarchy conversations and all that stuff, I'm surprising people. And from time to time, I will take a seat on the side of the table and give to someone else the head of the table seat. But it was cool when you realize the kids, all of us, we had our seats around. Actually, I love a round table where we all can sit around the table and there's no head. So over the last couple of weeks, as Jane and I have been talking about this, I've realized and gone back and refreshed my memory on how much the Bible says about tables. Way back in Israel's history, when they were wandering in the wilderness, they put together this little tent. I don't know if you remember the story or not, but it was a little tent, and it was to show this odd nomadic people that God was with them. This was to be a reminder. They were to see the things that were in this tent, and it was to be a reminder that God was with them. It had hardly any furniture in it at all, but it did have a table. The book of Exodus gives really explicit instructions on how this table was to be constructed. It was so special, they were to overlay it with gold, so very, very beautiful. And it was also very small. It was just 3 feet by 1.5 feet by about 2 feet high. And there was a pitcher on it where they would put their wine. And then there was a special kind of bread that was to always be on the table. This is what Exodus 25:30 says. "Put the bread of the presence on this table to be before me at all times." Let me ask you a question. Do you like the smell of baked bread? I love the smell of baked bread. There's nothing like that. So in the Bible, the King James Version, this wonderful bread had a beautiful name. It was called showbread, or the bread of his presence. And this bread was to show the people that God is here. You're not alone. In the book of Leviticus, we're told that there were to be 12 loaves of bread on the table. Any idea why 12 loaves of bread? Of course, there were 12 tribes of Israel. And so this was to be a picture of the fact that whichever line you were in, whatever tribe you were in, God was enough. There was going to be enough. There's plenty for everybody. There's a place for you at the table. They say the sense of smell evokes more memories than any other of our senses. And it was kind of like God saying, I want the aroma of the bread in my house at all times, so you will know that I am here and I am always here for you. Neil and I have had interesting conversations over the last several weeks as we have talked about the day we moved back into the village building. We've talked about, Neil says, we need to make sure we have beautiful smell, maybe the smell of incense when people walk in that kind of captures them. I was thinking this week, how about the smell of baked bread? I think that might be the happiest smell any of us could have to just kind of remind us, yeah, this is a beautiful place. That was that first story of the people of God, the nation of Israel in the wilderness, carrying this tent with them, but the 12 loaves of bread, they are on a table saying God is with them. There's a really poignant table theme to the life of David. When David was a young guy, Saul was the king, and Saul was very jealous of David, and Saul had put this plan together, and he was inviting David over to his house, and he was going to kill David because he saw him as a threat. And so David gets news of this, and he doesn't show up, but Saul's son, Jonathan, he stood up to his dad, and he said, Dad, what you're doing is so wrong. My loyalty is with David. He is not any trouble. You're the one that's causing the trouble. And it was around a table that conversation happened. David, it was significant in David's life, and it was so good that he had been tipped off. That was Jonathan's way of saying, my loyalty is with you, David. Now, years later, David is ascended to the throne. King Saul is dead. His son, Jonathan, is dead. And David asked, is there any descendants of the former king, King Saul, and David's best friend, Jonathan, who he could show love towards? And one of his people that worked for him said, there is one. He's a nephew, and his name is Mephibosheth, and he is handicapped, and you may not want the problems. And David said, no, I want to serve him and love him. So David tracked him down. 2 Samuel chapter 9, verse 7, David says to Mephibosheth, don't be afraid. I'm going to show you the kindness in my heart that I had for your father Jonathan. I'll restore to you all the land that belonged to your grandfather Saul, and you will always eat at my table. There's that word again, table. To eat at the king's table meant to live under the king's protection and to be treated as a member of the family of the king. Mephibosheth was terrified. You got to remember his head of his family, King Saul, had tried to kill David, so he's thinking maybe David's going to pull a fast one. He's going to kill me. He even says, who is this servant that you should be mindful of a dead dog like me? That's pretty low self-esteem, right? Dead dog like me. My grandfather tried to kill you. People could think I was an heir to your throne. I'm not. But David said, no, Mephibosheth, I want you at my table. And I thought this was cool. 4 times in 2 Samuel chapter 9, the scripture says Mephibosheth ate at David's table like one of the king's sons. That gets me. That gets me that he ate at the table. I've often thought about what family gatherings were like in the palace, and I know I don't really know what it was like, but I always picture David's son Amnon, and I figure from some of the things in his life, he is clever and kind of a trickster, and he's articulate and witty, and he comes to the table first, and maybe Joab, who was David's chief general, maybe he comes in august in his military dress, and then perhaps Absalom, which was David's son, that was so handsome and had such charisma. And then David had a daughter named Tamar, and I'm sure she was beautiful, and she would come to the table. And then later, maybe Solomon, all these books under his arm, Solomon comes in, the wisest of the wise. And then I can imagine hearing the struggling steps of the diminutive Mephibosheth as he comes hobbling into the room, and he smiles, and everybody smiles, and he humbly joins the others at the table. I love that. I've never gotten past the idea of the beauty of a table. You can tell a lot about a person's heart by who they make a place for at their table. I thought this week about another verse in Psalm 23. You know the 23rd Psalm, right? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil, thou art with me. But this is what I want you to hear today, verse 5. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Eating is a kind of funny thing. Appetite actually is a kind of funny thing. It comes and goes, and there are certain times that you can't eat, and one of those times is when you are anxious or you're afraid. But that beautiful psalm written by David says God prepares a table for us, even in those situations when we should be afraid, even in those situations when we should be anxious, even in those situations when maybe we think we would never be able to eat. God says, you've got this. You're going to be okay. I've prepared a table. Yes, there are enemies around, but I'm with you. We're okay. I thought that was a beautiful idea. Beautiful, beautiful thing. You can tell a lot by who a person sits with at their table, and that certainly was true with Jesus. Jesus was constantly getting in trouble for this. In his culture, to sit at a table with somebody was to extend to that person acceptance and love and protection and friendship. And Jesus did it with a very diverse group. And the people who were the religious leaders of the day, they could not stand it. He did not have the right people around him at the table. The Pharisees asked his disciples in Matthew chapter 9, verse 11, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? They just couldn't get their arms around it. Or Luke chapter 15, they said this of Jesus, this man welcomes sinners and he eats with them. In other words, he is seated with them around the table. He got into a lot of trouble about the table, but he never apologized for it. He would never stop being seated at the table with humanity, people from every walk of life. He loved everybody. In fact, in that same chapter, Luke chapter 15, he tells the story that's really a story about a table when you think about it. You've heard the preachers preach on Luke 15, right? The prodigal son. Imagine it from this perspective, a dad and two sons, and they're seated around the table and everything is good and it's love, and yet something is stirring in that younger son. Something is boiling up inside. And over time, he finally gets the courage to say, Dad, I don't really want to be here. I want to figure this thing out far from here. So I know there's an inheritance. And if you could just cut me a check now, I want to go and I want to see what's out there and I want to take my best shot. And that's what he did. I imagine the saddest day of the old dad's life was when he wrote that check. He said to his son, I miss you already and I love you. And then suddenly the son was gone. The son was on his journey, and the dad and the older son are seated at the table with an empty chair. Let me stop just a moment and talk about an empty chair. Any of you have an empty chair at your table? Maybe a mom. Y'all know Sonia Spikes. She's been in our church now for a long time, one of the greatest people in the world. You know, a couple of weeks ago, she called me and said, Pastor Ray, please pray for my mom. Please pray for my mom. She's got the COVID. And her mom's young. Her mom's young, energetic, beautiful. I said, Sonia, oh my gosh, Jane and I are stopping right now. We are praying for your mom, and we're praying for your mom every day. And then a couple of days later, she wrote me and said, Pastor Ray, mom's in the hospital and they've put her on ventilator. Please pray. And Jane was praying and I was praying. And then we got a note from Sonia that said, Pastor Ray, my mom passed away yesterday. Can you imagine? Mother's Day's coming up in May. Sonia will be seated at a table where normally her mom would have been seated, but she will not be there. I think of others of you who have an empty chair on the table. Maybe it's death. Maybe it's someone has left you. You thought they loved you. They've said, I need to go my own way. And you're seated at an empty table. When I think about that prodigal son story, I think about that dad first from that perspective. Oh my gosh, that empty seat at the table and how long that must have been. But then you remember the prodigal came home. The dad was so happy, killed a fatted calf, put a ring on his finger, put a robe on his back. We're going to throw the biggest party in the world because all the seats are going to be filled at the table. This is what it's supposed to be. And the oldest son said, why are you throwing a party for him? He broke your heart. He did some nasty stuff. He wasted the money that you gave him. Yeah, I'm done. I'm out of here. I've been perfect my whole life. I'm going to go outside. You'll still have an empty seat at the table. Do you remember? When the story ends, the father is outside with his arm around the older son saying, son, you've always been with me. I love you, but your brother was lost, but he's come home. We should celebrate. We should celebrate. I love a table. I can't get over a table. And when I think about love, it's always around a table. I hope you get that. I know this has been the most difficult time of our life. Now, a few introverts have said this has been so hard on them, and I get it. I totally get it. But for many of us, there is something so joyous, introvert and extrovert, about sitting around the table with close people that we love. And through the pandemic, we've not been able to do that. And I think that's what caused Jane and I to talk about it the other day. It's like we saw maybe the door opening again. People are getting their vaccines, and that's wonderful. And I don't know when it's going to be when they say, hey, the risk is over, open your houses, open the churches. We're trying to be very cautious. I'm telling you the truth. We are trying to be very, very, very cautious. We would rather have dialogues on the internet through FaceTime than to put people at risk, bringing them back into the building before it's time. But I'm telling you something, I'm committed to us spending more time at least FaceTiming and pretending that we're sitting at a table. Back a few months ago, we have a couple in our church, Leah and Amy. And Jane and I had a date night with Leah and Amy, and we did it on FaceTime. And you know what? I don't know if it was the same thing as being seated around the table, but it was something. And I felt like I knew them a little bit better. I felt like they knew me and Jane a little bit better. And I want to pick that practice up more because we want you around our table. You know, difficulties are going to come in this life. They're always going to come. And I think the people who are best prepared are people who have spent time in community, building friendships and familial relationships, chosen family. So when the hard times come, you've got some friends who walk with you, talk with you. Well, the last table I'll talk about I just want to talk about it for a moment, is that table that Jesus sat around with his disciples. We'll remember it this coming Friday, right? Good Friday. That's the night that Jesus sat with his disciples and he talked more about his death. You remember he offered them wine to drink and he offered them bread and he said, this is something I want you to do from this day forth. When you gather together in my name, I want you guys to do this. And it was communion. I want you to remember me and celebrate my life, and I want you to follow me and do what I have done. Well, I thought about doing communion online today, but I have moved it to next week because I know we're going to do it in the park, and I want you to be with us when we do it in the park. We're also going to have a service online for those who cannot come. We'll have a service online and we'll have communion even in that service. But it was one time of Jesus saying, keep the table central to what you're doing as a church and remember me around the table. I hope that's been a hope-filled message for you. I know it's been hopeful for me to kind of remember these things because y'all, we're coming back. We're coming back. I don't know when. I think I can envision us having a service a month in the park, and I can imagine possibly about the time school starts in the fall, maybe August. I can imagine the doors opening with the biggest grand reopening you've ever seen. And I can imagine enough people having received the vaccines that we feel comfortable having people in groups talking and spending time together. And that's my hope, and that's my prayer, and that's my dream. Don't forget, don't give up on it. It's coming. And it's what church is all about. If we're not around the table with each other a lot, then what's the point? That needs to be a part of our lives. Well, you are lovely, lovely, lovely. And I appreciate so much you tuning in. And I feel like our online community has gotten stronger. Just this past week, I had conversation with a young lady that watches what we do from Brazil. And she wanted to join one of our small groups. And so I've hooked her up with Kylie, Joe, and Jenny, and she's in one of our small groups right now. Why is that? Because she wants to experience the love of the Village Church, Everybody Church. She wants to experience that kind of love. And we're doing it even through FaceTime or through Zoom. And I just think that's a beautiful thing. Well, I love you. I can't wait to see you next Sunday. Bring your mask. We're going to be in the park. You're going to feel safe. The service is going to be wonderful, and I can't wait. Love you a bunch.